Have you ever looked at someone and thought, I would never become like that? Maybe it was a person who seemed lazy, someone who gave up on their dreams, someone who stayed in a job they hated, or someone who made choices that did not make sense to you. At some point in life, most people judge others. We look at their situation from the outside and believe we understand their story. We think we know what we would do if we were in their place. We feel certain that we would make better decisions. But life has a strange way of teaching us humility. Sometimes, after many years, we wake up and realize that we have become the very person we once judged. This realization can be uncomfortable. It can even be painful. It forces us to look at ourselves in a new way. We may ask questions that we never wanted to ask. How did I get here? What changed? Why am I doing the same things that I criticized in others? These questions are difficult because they challenge the image we have of ourselves. Most people want to believe they are consistent. They want to believe their values are strong and their choices are clear. Yet life is often more complicated than we expect. When we are young, it is easy to judge. We usually see life in simple terms. We think people succeed because they work hard and fail because they do not. We think confidence comes naturally to successful people and fear only belongs to the weak. We think people who stay in unhealthy relationships should simply leave. We think people who abandon their dreams are not brave enough. From a distance, every problem seems to have an obvious solution. The problem is that distance creates simplicity. The closer we get to real life, the more complicated everything becomes. We begin to understand that every person carries invisible struggles. There are pressures, fears, responsibilities, and emotional wounds that cannot be seen from the outside. The person we judged was never just a label. They were a human being dealing with circumstances we did not fully understand. Imagine a young person who dreams of becoming an artist. They look at adults working ordinary jobs and think, I will never live like that. I will follow my passion no matter what. Years later, they find themselves sitting in an office, doing work that does not excite them. They feel tired. Their creative projects remain unfinished. They wonder what happened to the dream they once had. Did they become weak? Did they fail? Maybe not. Maybe life simply became more complex. Rent had to be paid. Family members needed support. Unexpected problems appeared. The dream was still there, but survival became more urgent. Suddenly, the adults they once judged no longer seem foolish. They seem human. One of the biggest reasons we become the people we used to judge is that experience changes our perspective. Before we experience something ourselves, we only understand it in theory. After we live through it, we understand it emotionally. These are very different kinds of knowledge. For example, many people judge those who struggle with anxiety. They may think, just stop worrying so much. Then one day, they face a serious challenge. Perhaps they lose a job, face financial problems, or go through a painful breakup. Their mind becomes full of fear and uncertainty. They discover that anxiety is not simply a choice. It is a real emotional experience. What once looked like weakness now looks like something much more understandable. The same thing happens with mistakes. We often judge people who make poor decisions because we focus only on the result. We see the outcome and ignore the circumstances. But when we make our own mistakes, we suddenly become aware of all the factors involved. We remember our stress, our confusion, our exhaustion, and our fear. We realize that bad decisions do not always come from bad intentions. Sometimes they come from being human. This does not mean every action should be excused. People are still responsible for their choices. However, understanding is different from approval. You can recognize why someone acted in a certain way without saying that the action was correct. Maturity often means learning this difference. As we grow older, many of our strong opinions become softer. We stop speaking in absolutes. We use fewer words like always and never. We become less interested in proving that we are right and more interested in understanding what is true. This change can feel uncomfortable because certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. Yet doubt often opens the door to wisdom. There is another reason why becoming the person you used to judge feels so surprising. Most people imagine their future selves based on their current emotions. When we are motivated, we assume we will always be motivated. When we are confident, we assume confidence will stay forever. When we are strong, we imagine that strength will never leave us. But human beings are not fixed. We change. Our energy changes. Our priorities change. Our circumstances change. The person you are today is not the same person you will be 10 years from now. This is not a weakness. It is simply part of being alive. Think about someone who once judged people for staying in difficult relationships. They believed they would leave immediately if they were treated badly. Then they fall deeply in love. They build a life with someone. They share memories, hopes, and plans. When problems appear, leaving is no longer a simple decision. Emotions make everything more complicated. Suddenly, they understand why other people stayed longer than expected. Life teaches lessons that opinions alone cannot teach. Experience gives depth to our understanding. It shows us the difference between knowing about something and truly knowing it. Sometimes becoming the person you used to judge can create feelings of shame. You may feel disappointed in yourself. You may think you have betrayed your younger self. But this feeling is not always fair. Your younger self knew less than you know now. They had fewer experiences and fewer responsibilities. They saw the world through a limited lens. Instead of feeling ashamed, it may be better to feel grateful. Becoming the person you once judged can reveal how much you have learned. It can show you that life is larger and more complicated than you once believed. It can make you more compassionate toward others. Compassion is one of the most valuable qualities a person can develop. It changes the way we see people. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with them?" we begin asking, "What happened to them?" Instead of focusing only on behavior, we become curious about the story behind the behavior. This shift is powerful because every person is fighting battles that others cannot see. The colleague who seems lazy may be dealing with exhaustion. The friend who seems distant may be struggling emotionally. The parent who appears impatient may be carrying enormous stress. We rarely know the full story. When we become the person we once judged, we are forced to confront this reality. We realize how easy it is for others to misunderstand us. We know that our own story contains details that outsiders cannot see. This realization helps us offer the same understanding to others. Interestingly, becoming the person you used to judge does not always happen in negative ways. Sometimes we judge people because we secretly fear becoming them. For example, someone may judge a person who chooses a simple life instead of chasing success. They may see that person as unambitious. Years later, after experiencing stress and burnout, They may decide that peace is more valuable than status. Suddenly, the life they once criticized begins to make sense. In these situations, the change can be liberating. We stop living according to other people's expectations. We begin listening to our own needs. We discover that happiness does not always look the way we imagined. Many people spend years chasing goals that society tells them to chase. They want promotions, recognition, money, and achievement. They judge those who seem less driven. But after reaching some of these goals, they sometimes feel empty. They realize that success is not as simple as they thought. They begin valuing relationships, health, and inner peace more than external rewards. Again, they become the person they once judged. This pattern appears throughout life because growth often requires letting go of certainty. Every stage of life reveals new truths. The beliefs that served us in one chapter may not serve us in another. Holding on to old judgments too tightly can prevent us from understanding reality. The challenge is that our identity often becomes connected to our opinions. If we strongly judge a certain type of person, admitting that we have become similar to them can feel like admitting failure. But growth is not failure. Growth sometimes means changing your mind. In fact, one of the strongest signs of maturity is the ability to update your understanding when new experiences teach you something important. A mature person does not cling to old beliefs simply to protect their ego. They are willing to learn. They are willing to admit that they did not know everything. This does not mean abandoning values. Some principles remain important throughout life. Kindness, honesty, responsibility, and respect still matter. What changes is our understanding of how difficult it can be to live according to these values every day. We become more patient with human imperfection, including our own. Perhaps the most important lesson from becoming the person you used to judge is that nobody is immune to life's challenges. We all have weaknesses. We all have moments of confusion. We all make choices that our younger selves might not understand. Recognizing this truth can make us less arrogant and more humble. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is understanding that you do not know everything. It is recognizing that life can surprise you. It is accepting that your future self may think differently from your current self. Humility creates space for learning, growth, and connection. The next time you find yourself judging someone, it may be worth pausing for a moment. Ask yourself a simple question: what parts of their story can I not see? What challenges might they be facing? How might my opinion change if I lived their life for a year? You may never know the answers, but the questions themselves can make you more compassionate. And if you have already become the person you once judged, perhaps that is not a sign that you failed. Perhaps it is a sign that life has taught you something important. Perhaps it is a reminder that human beings are more complex than labels, more fragile than they appear, and more connected than they realize. The person you judged years ago was not simply a lesson about them. They were also a lesson about you. They showed you a possibility that you could not yet understand. Now, standing on the other side of experience, you see things differently. You see the hidden struggles, the difficult choices, the impossible situations, and the emotional weight that people carry every day. And maybe that is one of the quiet purposes of growing older. Not to become perfect, not to always be right, but to become more understanding. To replace judgment with curiosity. To replace certainty with wisdom. To replace distance with empathy. Because in the end, Life has a remarkable way of reminding us that we are all much more alike than we think. The people we judge are often mirrors. We simply do not recognize our reflection until years later.